Chapter 6 Raven. A few days later, Hake comes to me in the yard with something large and square in his arms, wrapped in a sack. Everyone watches him, and he shifts back and forth on the heels of his boots in front of me. He is so rough, and yet it was he who thought to protect me when Purr did not. "I have something for you, Solveig," he says. "It is a gift." I manage a nod. "Can we go inside?" I nod again. We turn and approach the hall. There is an awkward moment standing before the door when Hake clearly wants to open it for me, but he looks at the bundle in his arms. "Let me," I say, and open it. He steps through, sheepish, and looks around as if to make sure we are alone. It seems we are. Bera and Roddy are out milking the cows in the shed. Asa may be hidden away in our bed closet, but I'm not sure. Hake sets the bundle on the ground, and I hear a flutter inside. "First, I must confess something to you." I wait. He clears his throat. It was I who killed your goat." I know that, or had guessed it, but his integrity touches me. His voice becomes quieter. "I'm sorry for that. I had no idea that you had become so fond of the animal. So in recompense for what I did, I wanted to give you something. Something else you might be fond of." He looks at me as though waiting for me to reply, and when I don't, he kneels on the ground. "Here is your gift," he says, and whips off the sack. It is a cage made of sticks and fastened with leather cords. A young raven sits inside the cage, flicking its black jewel eyes at me. Its feathers are glossy as pitch, almost blue. The bird makes a few half-hearted caws and hops around the cage. Its head is plucked bald in patches, as though someone had started preparing it to eat, and I can see its pink, wrinkled skin. Its wings are short, the flight feathers clipped, and one of them is bent at an odd angle. Hake notices me looking at it. That wing makes it easy to catch him, as he can't truly fly. It looks like it got broke some time ago, and you can see where the other birds have pecked him. I'm surprised he's survived. "Poor thing," I say. He's an outsider, which is how I often feel. Ravens are smart. I once saw a man who had trained his raven to fetch things about the steading for him. They can even learn to talk. This one is young, and after he's bonded to you, he'll ride your shoulder. I'm nervous about having this bird for a pet, but out of politeness I thank him. "He'll eat anything," Hake says. "Your table and kitchen scraps. They're scavengers." "Thank you," I say again, wishing I could think of something more. He hovers, hands behind his back, looking back and forth between the bird and me. "Do you like him?" he asks. The bird hops toward me in the cage, looks up at me and makes a clicking sound. I imitate the sound back at him, and the raven cocks his head and makes a clicking sound again, as if we're talking to each other. "I do like him," I say. "Thank you, Hake." "You're welcome. Will you name him?" "Yes, but I don't know what." And then I remember that the god Odin has 2 ravens that whisper to him what they see in their flights across the land. Their names are Hugin and Munin, thought and memory. I think I'll name him Munin. Hake smiles as he is pleased. A good name. I crouch down near the cage, and Hake lingers a moment longer. "Well," he says, "good afternoon." "Good afternoon, Hake." He marches out the door, a different sort of man to me now than he was but moments before. As brutal and violent as berserkers can be, Hake can also be thoughtful and caring. I look into the eyes of my bird, my new friend, and he looks back at me. "Hello, Munin," I whisper. Now that I have memory, all I need is sight. After the night meal, Harold tries poking Munin with a stick through the bars of his cage. Munin flaps his bent wing, trying to get away, and I snatch the stick from Harold's hands. "Leave him alone." "Look at that ugly bird," Harold laughs. "Why is it bald?" "He's not ugly," I say. "He's picked on and bullied. His feathers will grow back." Harold laughs again, and Purr comes over. "Leave the bird alone, lad," he says. "It was a gift from Hake." Harold wrinkles his nose. "I'd give it right back." Per smiles at me with a slight shrug, and I give my eyes a little roll. Other than Harold, everyone admires Moonin. Roddy continues to smile at me. The Berserkers worship Odin, and they nod to the cage in respect and appreciation. Ravens means something different to them. The Berserkers call ravens swans of blood because they feed on the bodies after a fierce battle. Hake probably thought it was a noble gift, but my Moonin doesn't look very noble half-bald, and I don't like to think of him eating anything but bugs and berries. I try to feed him from my hand. At first he is wary and jabs his beak at me as if he wants to just drop the food on the ground for him. But I'm stubborn and patient. He must learn to take the food from me so he will trust me. As the evening passes, he begins to come closer to my fingers, and his beak becomes gentler. Before long, he is feeding right out of my palm. Hake comes over and watches me pass Moonin bits of food. He's already taken to you. I hope so, I say. But I don't think he's ready to ride on my shoulder. No, but he will be. Hake smiles and moves off to be with his men. Asa joins me after he has left, and we sit together, wordlessly. I pass her a bit of bread, and she holds it just inside the bars of the cage. Moonin makes a grab, and Asa flinches, dropping the crumbs. The raven snatches them with a caw that sounds like a laugh, as though he's won some victory. Asa laughs too, a sound I haven't heard from her in a long while. Your bird reminds me of Gunlog, she says. You remember what he was like when he came to our hall? Before the war? Asa sits up. Gunlog's head is just as bald and pink. I remember him at Father's table after he'd drunk too much mead. And he laughs like Moonin, too. Asa nods, but the smile falls from her lips. She reaches for another breadcrumb and doesn't bother to hand it to my bird. She just tosses it inside the cage. He wanted to marry me, she says. I stare at her. I didn't know that. Then I think about Asa leaving our hall to be Gunlog's wife, and I don't know what to say. Father refused him, she says. That's why we're at war, because of me. No, that's not right. It isn't your fault, I say, nor Father's. Gunlog is the one who declared war. And I begin to feel the burden that Asa has been carrying. This is what has driven her into silence and sadness. She stares at something across the room, and I follow her gaze. She's watching Purr as he laughs with Hake. Asa's eyebrows are sloped in worry, and she stays that way for some time without moving. At last she rises. I'm tired. I think I'll go to bed. Good night, then. I envy you, Solveig, she says over her shoulder as she walks away. I'm stunned. What is there in me to envy? Asa is everything to our father, and I am nothing. Moonin flutters and draws my attention. I give him a bite of turnip and watch him swallow it down. The more I think about it, the more I realize he does resemble Gunlog. Wrinkled skin, sparse black hair. I stare at him, seeing not my bird, but that old chieftain in my cage. I know I've told myself that I would gladly marry for father, but I've never considered that such a pledge might mean marriage to an old man who resembles a scraggly raven. I feel foolish for never having thought of it. I'm sad for Asa, and for the first time I see her beauty as a burden instead of a blessing. And I feel the guilt weight she has been carrying this whole time. She is asleep when I climb into the bed closet later that night. I settle down next to her, trying to think of how I can help, but my thoughts are like snowflakes drifting away from me or melting on my skin as soon as I catch them. The next several weeks bring the fullness of winter's cold weight. The pale sun is too weak to warm us for the few hours that we have its light, and the night seems to swell, filling the world with stars and endlessness. The glacier has slowly settled into its seasoned sleep and fallen silent, and the fjord is a narrow white road to the sea. We spend more of our time indoors, and the fires in the long hearth are never allowed to burn out. The berserkers have stopped complaining, but that frightens me even more than when they bluster and fight. If they're pacing the hall like chained dogs, I at least know how they feel. Silence makes them even more unpredictable. Ole sits with his bone knife in the corner, showing Harold how to repair the frayed ropes and holes in one of his fishing nets. His movements are practiced and almost loving, like an old woman braiding a granddaughter's hair. Harold yawns and gets his fingers tangled. Munin hops around in his cage, cawing at me, his head feathers still a little sparse. But his flight feathers have lengthened. I have never let him out since Hake gave him to me. I felt that I had to shrink his world before I could trust him to not fly off. But perhaps it has been long enough, and I can let the walls loose, just a little. Roddy, I say, will you watch the doors for me? Roddy gets to his feet. Watch the doors? I'm going to let Munin out of his cage. Roddy looks at my bird, nods, and walks over to the doors. He stands in front of them, arms crossed. Those in the hall with us, including several berserkers, are watching me now. I take a deep breath and look right into my raven's eye. I'm going to let you around the hall for a bit, but only for a short while. And I'd like it if you perched on my shoulder for at least a moment. Munin shakes, ruffling his neck feathers. I pull one of the cage sticks free, and then another, and then a whole side falls open. Munin cocks his head and hops right out. He looks back at the outside of his cage for the first time. Then he launches himself into wobbly flight, hampered by his bent wing. But he manages to flutter up to one of the rafters, where he caws in delight and proceeds to preen. I go and sit under him, my head bowed, a bit of food in my hand. At first I hold the food in my lap, then up at my neck. I tap my shoulder. Patience, miss, one of the berserkers says. He's looking right at you. I call to him. Come to me, bird of Odin. He's cocking his head, Harold whispers. He's got one eye on you. I whistle. Come, Munin, my memory. His talons click on the wooden rafter. I smile and look up. He shuffles his little rear end out over the beam, and he squats. His droppings fall right in my hair. I let out a little yelp, and everyone laughs. Roddy looks like he's trying not to laugh and covers his mouth with his hands. He's distracted when the hall door opens. A blast of frozen wind pushes into the room and sends Munin flapping and cawing. He staggers into the air and flies straight for the opening, that strip of free sky. Roddy! I shout. He slams the doors just as Munin reaches them, and my bird thumps against the wood. Then he turns in the air to find a new perch, frantic wings beating, unable to keep him aloft. He slowly descends to the floor where I'm able to scoop him up and drop him back into his cage. I close the side and slide the sticks back into place. Munin hops and screeches as if I'm trapping him for the first time. I'm so sorry, Roddy says. He's still holding the doors shut, but now he lets them go. In walks Purr. He glares at Roddy confused. Then he sees me at the cage. You had him out? He asks me. I nod. I think he almost came to my shoulder. Harold laughs. And then he pooped on her head. I grimace and raise my hand to hide my hair. I'll have to brush the droppings out later after they've dried. Purr grins. He must still be trying to figure out if he can trust you. That's not it, Ole says. The old man is still sitting in his corner, the net spread over his lap and around his feet. He looks up at me. You're the one trying to figure out if you can trust him. It's you that needs the cage, not the bird. What do you mean, I ask. Once you've trapped a wild animal, he'll always want out. So you always have to keep him locked up, or else wonder every time you open those bars if this'll be the day he turns on you and flies away. He'll come to me, I say. I trust him. But even as I say it, I know I won't let Munin go flying around again anytime soon. Perhaps in the hall, but not outside. Ole looks at the cage and then goes back to the rope in his hands. The rest of the afternoon and evening pass uneventfully. We eat our night meal. Ulrich recites a few stories to make us feel something bigger than the hall we're trapped in. And then it's time for bed. I am standing at the cliff, and it all happens as before. The Drakkar is bearing evil. the berserker corpses open-eyed and pale, the wolf cloud snarling destruction, the burning hall and our doom under the glacier's heel. There is nothing I can do to stop it. I wake with a gasp and lie, panting in the darkness. I've had the dream twice now, which means it must be a portent. And then I think of Hale's suspicions about a spy watching me from the woods. Something is coming. The enemy will find us, and maybe already has. I hug myself, feel my own heart beating in my chest, and find it hard to fall back asleep. It was only last midsummer, Asa, when you tried on one of Mother's finest dresses for the first time. Father said you were a woman now, and so it was time. I remember you standing there before the fire, and how amazed I was at the deep colors in the fabric, the softness of its weave. "Oh, Asa, you look so beautiful," I said. You smiled for a moment, and then you began to cry. You fell to your knees and wept into your hands, and I looked around confused, not knowing what I had said or done. "It's all right," I said, and tried to hug you, but you pushed me away. But then you came over, Bera. There, you said, and you rubbed your hand across Asa's back. She'd be happy to see you wearing it. And Asa, through your tears, you said, "I miss her." And then I realized that you were talking about our mother, the mother that you remembered, but I could not. But now I knew it wasn't only that. "I wish I could say it gets easier," Bera said to you. "But I have to be honest with you, child. You'll cry on your wedding day, and you'll cry at the birth of your first child, and each child thereafter, because your mother won't be there. But she'd be proud of the woman you've become." Asa, you looked up at her then, tear-streaked. "You think so?" "I know it," Bera said. And you said, "You'll be there, won't you, Bera?" And Bera said, "Always."